So I've been thinking about a way of doing graphics on a Pico with a 1024 by 768 flat panel display, like I you can get for about £5 from charity shops by the look of it. I hope the charity shop here in Wealdstone isn't an exception. But they seem to get dozens and dozens in each week, and they all sell for about £5. So you have a display of and so this is really 10 bits, and this is 9.5 bits. 10 bits down to here. So what I'm thinking about is Dijkstra's fancy languages for writing to the teletype, and I'm imagining that we have somewhere in the Pico a DMA channel feeding a PIO. I'm not quite sure how the pin mappings work, but let's just maybe assume that it's monochrome for now. So it's just one PIO pin. And the DMA is getting its stuff. It's feeding it into the PIO FIFO at a rate which the FIFO won't run out of. And it's getting it out of let's say a pixel line buffer. And the pixel line buffer is being fed by is in pairs. And at the end of each line, the pairs are swapped. And this is the writing, and this is the input, and that's the output pair. So the DMA is working from the output buffer, and then during the time that is being output, this one is being filled. So there's an ISR. The DMA ISR is switching the line buffer, and the ISR is a piece of machine code that fills this with a line of pixels to be displayed up here. And my idea is that this ISR has got different behaviors depending on the way this display is set up. So for example, we might have a text window down here, which is showing 8 by 16 8 by 16 pixels characters, and a graphics display here which is showing, say, a grid of divisions. So let's say that this is a Pico oscilloscope with some horizontal and vertical divisions of different colors. Generating that grid is one type of code that you have in an ISR that's filling a line buffer. And the parameters that the code gets are the current scan line and the pixels. So the code is like an enumerator for the pixel values in this. Well, one type of code that the ISR runs is that. Another type of code does something different. Here it looks up character indices into a character table, and it looks up the appropriate pixels from the character table. But here it calculates, it just looks at the horizontal and vertical coordinates and says, oh, are we on one of these grids? Are we on a yellow vertical bar, a yellow dotted line dash for vertical bars, or a green dot dot dash pattern horizontal bars? And if so, output yellow or green pixels, otherwise output black. But in addition, now there might be an overlay here which contains a series of pixel values that represent some output of an A to D converter. And these are typically a raster. You really only need to store the amount of white black space above and below, and everything in between is possible values for the trace. So that's another type of code. So when the ISR is generating this line of text, this line here, it's combining the grid, the output of the grid pixel enumerator with the output of the trace pixel enumerator and the output of the text box. So it's an ISR which has a loop which kind of jumps into various parts of the code. You can imagine it as a label. Graphics grid and the label graphics trace and the label text. And it's running code and accumulating here, and it's outputting a pixel. So what I'm talking about is programming the fancy language that that is being used to talk to the operators is being compiled into pixel buffer loading ISR code. And then to change the display, we just reprogramming the pixel buffer ISR. And I thought one idea might be useful is the idea of quad trees. Wow. It's important when you're drawing not to try and draw while looking through the telephone. You draw looking at the paper, because even that tiny amount of delay is just enough to completely mess you up. So with quad trees, you divide the display into 512 bits and 512, and you divide each of those into 256. And in fact, we only have 3 of the 4 in, because it's 1024 by 768, not 1024 by 1024. So this part is not used. But the thing about quad tree representations of points is that any of your boundaries, like these things, will eventually hit one of the subdivisions, because these go down to the individual bits if you've got a power of 2 in the number of pixels. So eventually these decisions about which of these branches to jump to in the ISR loop is going to be based on the bit values of the horizontal and vertical pixels. Keeping it vague, because that way the blocks that we move around aren't very, there isn't much wrapping up to do of details.